Okay, let's see here. All right, I think we have audio now. Thank you. Thank you, folks, for mentioning that. Forgot a crucial thing. This is why usually I do these with other people who can tell me that everything is working. Note to self, don't don't forget that again. Okay, so you all missed the first thing I was saying, which wasn't all that important. But what I found out this morning was that today is the 1 year anniversary of developer calls. We did one of these very first ones since I had been here a year ago with Logan. So I'm kind of, I think it's kind of cool. It's been a year of those, which is cool. Anyway, this is not a developer call. This is about something completely different, but it will have a similar format. This is going to be kind of a casual conversation. I'll have a few slides that serve to anchor where I'm at. And feel free to just ask questions or tell me when my audio is out as you have them, and I'll answer them if they're relevant and if I'm not going to be, covering them shortly thereafter. Afterwards, I'll throw a link up. You can jump into a meet with me as usual, and we can just, talk and ask questions that way too. Another order of business worth mentioning is that, I scheduled this call about, it was like a month and a half ago or something. And in that time, the Galactic Senate has gotten really involved in the separation of the foundation, which has been really great. And we actually have a meeting with them. We're doing these monthly now in about 2 weeks, in which I'm going to present a more formal version of a lot of the things I'm talking about today to them to get essentially sign off on that and feedback. And that will inform an operating budget for a few years. And so you should know a lot of the things I'm discussing right now are preliminary. They're still waiting on that confirmation essentially from the Senate that will cement things. So this is going to be, kind of stream of consciousness. This is what's been on my mind and where I'm thinking of going and what I'll be proposing to the Senate. So if any of you senators are out there, definitely ask questions and help me think critically about this stuff. All right, so let me jump into this. First thing, I always like to do this because I don't know exactly who's in the audience. I think it's important to establish a little bit of context with where we are today, and where we have been in the past. And so if you don't know me, I came into the project about early 2020. I started by learning Hoon, again, for like the third time. I've done that a whole bunch of times. I got into it in early 2020 again because I suddenly got locked in a house and remembered Urbit, and it also happened that OS1 hit then, which was very exciting. But I kept kind of jumping further and further in. I went through Hoon School, and at least for me, whenever I learn to do a new thing, a new technical stack, or really anything, I need a project. I need something to practice my skills. And so at the time, I was, I've always depended on calendars a lot for organizing my many meetings. And so I thought, okay, Urbit needs calendar. Clearly, this would be a cool thing. And so I had this idea. I got into, I think, the development channel of UC, or maybe it was the Forge. And I said, hey, does anyone want to work on this calendar app with me? And in like 2 minutes, some guy, Savmap Ripsum, said, yeah, I do. He and I ended up talking for almost a year every single day. He was a much more capable programmer than I was. I had a good amount of background in kind of speccing projects, and so I contributed to that a little bit in the beginning. But by and large, this guy just, took over the whole thing and built it. And I ended up playing a role in which I just kind of worked with him and kept showing up and asking where things were at and contributing kind of to the ideation of the project, really. The calendar got built and it worked very well. And I was struck by this idea at the time that I started working with this guy and seeing, just how capable he was, that it took me 2 minutes to find this person. Clearly, there are high quality people in this community. I wonder how many more are hanging out that are looking for something to do. I pitched Galen on the idea of starting some small company in which I would manage a bunch of different grants and work with people, and then take some small cut for essentially managing them, and that could be, some viable business. And Galen said, I have a better idea. You should come and run the foundation from within Urbit, which should do that, right? It should engage the community of contributors to build things. So the way we started this was to run the foundation as a protocol, we called it. Like we will, and it's really mostly like to figure out what the protocol was. What should the foundation do? Like if it existed, if we reified this thing, what would be its mandate? How would it operate? And so running it within Tlon was a really good idea, because at least we thought, and it turned out to be true, because it cuts down a lot of overhead. We don't have to take any high stakes chances with assets being transferred to unknown quantities without having a clear picture of what the thing would do and how it would use them. So this let us really focus on, well, let's try and use grants and Urbit address space to do productive things, and forget about all of the rest of the administrative overhead that comes with running some kind of entity formally. We thought at the time, okay, it's going to do grants for sure, and probably the foundation at some point should take over core development. That was about the degree of fidelity of our thinking at the time. So my approach was, I'm just going to work really closely with contributors. I think this is probably the best place to start in figuring out what this thing should do. I'm just going to model my relationship with SovMap Ripsum into all the other relationships. Let me just talk to people, work with them on their projects, and see how this goes. And I spent a lot of time. I think there's probably many of you in the audience that I started meeting with late last year. I spent a lot of time just on calls weekly, talking to contributors and getting to know them, getting to know their projects and the struggles of building on Urbit. And this was, I think, really, really productive. Grants that I worked with contributors directly on generally succeeded. And even when they didn't, the person working on them remained part of the ecosystem and went on to do much more. So the idea of doing one-to-one community building, I think, is very powerful. And so over the course of the last year, this is kind of, in my mind, some of the core learnings, I think, are that, this direct connection with contributors makes a big difference, both in the quality of their work, the experience they have, the degree of community formation that happens. Another thing that, really stuck out, at least, especially for things like bounties and for proposals, is that the quality of the initial specification will make or break a project. Anyone that's built products or managed projects kind of knows this. If you don't have a clear idea of what it is that you're trying to do, then often nothing happens at all. So a lot of upfront work in defining a specification, which often means for someone that isn't familiar with the system, working with them to convey that understanding so it's clear what the capabilities actually are, will go a long way towards making sure that the experience someone has in doing work on their project is a successful one. So actually, I missed a couple of those. Let me continue. Okay, another thing that should be obvious, the Urbit community actually pulls in a lot of really quality people. And this has been ramping over time. This is one of my favorite parts of working at the foundation, is that I get to talk to, just all kinds of phenomenally interesting people from all over the world. And the other thing that I've noticed in being closely aligned with and working within Tlon is that grants are one of the best recruiting pipelines that I've ever seen in any kind of technical field. You basically get the capacity for people to come in and start a project and get paid to actually do it, and then you get the chance to work with them and see what they're like. And they get to work with you and see what you're like. And at the end of that relationship, deciding to go and work on something full time is often a no-brainer, and you can dispense with all the bullshit whiteboarding sessions that you would traditionally do if you were doing some kind of interview. And that's really important for an ecosystem, because ecosystems are comprised not only of individuals, but organizations like Tlon, and now several more that we'll talk about later. And organizations need people to focus on building things with them full time. Okay, so there's some things we learned over the last year. Let me talk a little bit about where we're at today with respect to what's going on at the foundation. So we started as a protocol. We're still a protocol. We're still this thing that doesn't technically exist. It's just Tlon. But we are moving to an entity, like a real thing. We're at the point now where, well, I'll just say, over the last several months, Eric Newton, Tlon's COO, has been doing a lot of background research on what the right way to structure a foundation is. Is it, what's the right jurisdiction? What's the right legal structure? Should it be a traditional boomer corp? Should it be a DAO? What Singapore, Wyoming DAO, BVI, Caymans? Well, we settled on a Caymans Foundation company after, and by we I mean Eric, after a very long period of research. And we actually today I think all of the paperwork that forms the entity is getting submitted to the Caymans after a long bout of legal KYC stuff that took a while to actually wrap up. So this is happening. We should have a formal foundation entity that can operate independently within weeks, I would say. Depends on whenever the Cayman Islands actually manages to do whatever they need to do with the paperwork that we're submitting. So this is really happening, and that means we have an entity. No one is at the entity yet. We still have to do the process of setting it up with all of the administrative overhead that it needs in order to actually run an organization, pay people, so on and so forth. We have defined the governance structure. We had to do this up front because in order to form any kind of legal entity, there has to be some kind of minimal set of bylaws. I just got your congrats. Thank you. So let me talk a little bit about what the governance structure is and what it'll be going forward. At the top, there are galaxies. They nominate and vote in a board of directors. The board of directors votes in an executive director. We want the galaxies to basically be the ultimate deciders of what goes on at this entity. So we have this tiered approach where the galaxies, there's many members of the galaxies that are actually very involved. There are a number that are not very involved. And there's still a period of time in which I think they will continue to ramp up and become more and more engaged. And so in that interim, we think it makes sense to have some layers of indirection in which the galaxies will probably pick amongst themselves and amongst the community that has demonstrated the most value add to Urbit so far, to select board members that are going to be very active. Where we're starting is that we have one director and one executive director. I'm the executive director, and our board member is probably on this call. His name's Sam. He's been around the community for a long time, longer than me. And we have to have basically two individuals that go and get KYC'd in order to be able to bring the rest of them in after we can establish our own governance structure with the bylaws when it's set up. And so one of our first tasks, once this entity is defined and we can really begin bringing it into existence, is to select those remaining board members, which the Galactic Senate will do themselves. We won't just be deciding those ourselves. So we want this thing to be as real with respect to having network really govern it as we can. A question that's often come up is, how do we determine how the foundation uses assets and distributes address space? How many galaxies does it get from the urbit.org assets that Tlon has? The answer, I think, is kind of simple. We're going to, at least I, as the first candidate for executive director, am going to come up with a budget that's going to define what we're going to use, or use all the assets for, as specific as I possibly can be, and submit that as, here's our proposed use for the next 2 years. Does this seem like a reasonable way to use assets? And we'll get some feedback from the Senate, incorporate that, and that will basically define what our initial starting batch of assets are to work with. So it's based on a plan. It's not arbitrary. It's not, let's send galaxies on a, time-locked basis. We want it to be driven by actual use and then outcomes, because if I do a shit job and I don't achieve any of the things that I say I will with the assets that I say I'm going to use, then I should probably be replaced. And so we want to have a grounds for that. Okay, where we're also at, grants are going really strong. We have a lot of interest. Assembly and software distribution have really helped to generate a lot of that interest. On the other hand, there's only 2 people that manage all of grants, myself and a guy you've probably met if you've interfaced with grants, Mike Osborne, goes by Teller Ravnut. Turns out, and we've known this for a while, reviewing grants is hard. It takes a while to actually read through everything and think about its, how well it maps onto where Urbit is presently, to invest the effort in a contributor, to meet with them on a regular basis and make sure that their project is successful, and then review the work when it's completed. We have to have the right skill set to actually evaluate whether or not the work is done well and correctly and satisfies the original goals. And grants are often all over the place. And between Mike and I, we often have the skill set to evaluate how they're going, but we often don't. So it's a lot to manage, and I'm going to go into some ideas about what we're going to do about this pretty soon. The other thing that's going on is that, as you may know, I've been Tlon's CPO in addition to being director of the nascent UF since April. And doing both of those things means there's a kind of a limited amount of bandwidth I can put into really any one thing. And so, well, all that means I'm a bottleneck. The bittersweet news is that at the end of the year, I'll be winding down that role at Tlon and coming into 2022 with the full-time mandate to do everything I need to do in order to get the foundation to be a totally independent thing under this entity that we formed. It's bittersweet because, while I've always been working with Tlon, working directly with all of those teams has been really amazing. Tlon has, one of the best work culture that I've ever been a part of. And, I will be sad to not be working in the capacity I have been with those guys again. But this was always meant to be a short-term thing. I'll do that for a while because at the time, back in April, we needed it. And now that the foundation really has this very clear future and path forward, and its importance is well understood and well defined, it's now the time to make that plunge into full-time foundationing. Okay, so finally, future of the foundation. That's what this talk is all about. Haven't talked about the future at all. Now we're going to talk about the future. Early on, we thought, okay, the foundation is ultimately going to do infrastructure development. It'll be what handles core development. And it'll probably do grants too. That was our, sort of vague, let's feel it out kind of thought early on. That thinking has changed to be something more like this. The Urbit Foundation invests in the ecosystem. And that's the way I like to think about it. It's essentially an investment vehicle for investing in individual contributors to run experiments, get started, learn, and not restricted to that, often produce very valuable contributions. And it will also invest in organizations. I'll touch on that more a little bit later. But its role is really to use Urbit address space, which you can think of as digital land, as something that we distribute to those that are going to develop it effectively. One of the things that the foundation will do is coordinate work across organizations. At the time that we first began running the foundation as a protocol, there weren't really, plural Urbit organizations. There wasn't really an ecosystem. There was like Tlon. Well, there was Tlon and Urbit Live. Now there's a lot more. There's Terrell. There's Urbit Host. There's DC Spark. There's this, mysterious thing that you may have heard of called Ukbar. There are organizations that are getting formed around Urbit. And one of the things that is now going to be needed is coordination across those. How do we set the right standards? How do we coordinate different streams of work and infrastructure developers that are working under the auspices of different organizations when we can't just all bring them into the same all hands meeting every Monday morning that Tlon does, because they don't necessarily all work at Tlon. So that'll be, one of the big roles of the foundation as well, is to act as this coordinating body. A key element to all of this, to everything else that I'm about to mention, is education and developer experience is going to be really crucial. Like having people that run experiments and begin new projects, work on infrastructure development, having all those presupposes that they actually have a good experience and that there's a ramp to educate them. And so, this will be one of our roles, at least until we can find a way to better house it under the auspices of some other organization, if that's the case. We will focus on developer experience, which means a lot of things. Documentation. You've probably met Tinus Nabus around the network. He works at the foundation now full-time and is absolutely cranking on really high quality documentation. There are courses. We had Hooniversity a while back. We had Hoon School before that. There have been a number of approaches to teaching how to develop Urbit. Neil Davis has been pretty instrumental in this, as many of you, probably remember from his class at Assembly. We do need to have some kind of take on how we educate people about the stack. And there needs to be better tooling. Developer tooling right now for Urbit is fairly ad hoc, but we could do a lot better. We could be fairly specific about what the development environment looks like from a tools perspective. So this is one of the things that we're going to take a hard look at. Now, the grants program, this is something I'm pretty excited about. I mentioned earlier that we're kind of inundated right now, between my, half of my time that's focused on the foundation and half of it that's focused on Tlon, and then, Tyler Ravnut, who's combing through a lot of things and meeting with people as fast as he can. We have this major bottleneck in that we have tried to centrally manage all of the grants intake to review incoming work and ascribe value to grants and ensure that we're using assets wisely, to work with those contributors over time, to review their work once it's done, to ensure that the work actually gets done and merged in the case that it is a contribution to the an existing repository. All that takes a lot of effort. I mean, it's very hard to do centrally, at least with just a couple of people that fill those roles. So what we're going to move to is getting the community more involved in actually stewarding grants forward, being guides to new contributors that want to do work, and compensate those people for it. So the idea here is you propose a proposal, and there's some group of people behind the scenes that have done grants work in the past, that have developed some competency. One of them sees your proposal and decides, I want to take a stab on this one. I think this is going to be successful. Let me work with this person to make it successful. We call that championing the project. So we have kind of a formal system. It'll look something like a DAO of existing contributors that have made solid contributions in the past. That DAO-like entity will be what drives grants forward to the future. It's community members that are working with other community members in the capacity that myself and Tim Mipt have done in the past, to ensure that incoming contributors have a very community-centric and hands-on experience as they work on projects and get onboarded into the ecosystem. The other thing that we're going to do, sort of, where grants are meant to encourage individuals to get involved and to try on their skill set and develop their skills, whether that be by experimentation or by some, known necessary contribution. The Combine seeks to invest in organizations. And I use the word organizations intentionally and not business, because I'm not sure that everything needs to be a business. Sometimes there may be businesses. But that's not the only kind of group of people working together to build something that one can envision these days. This is modeled after a known success case, which is Tlon. You can imagine Tlon like a real estate developer. They own a bunch of land. And so, while they don't make revenue, they invest a lot of resources into developing Urbit, because if they do that, it makes their land more valuable, right? This is real estate development. It's just digital real estate development. As I mentioned earlier, we have more and more organizations that are cropping up, right? That are all deciding that, Urbit is actually a place that we want to make really, really valuable, that we want to make good because it has the right infrastructure to develop the world that we want to live in. So these organizations, Terrell, DC Spark, Urbit Host, Uqbar, they are taking this similar stab that if we develop on Urbit, it will make the address space more valuable. That's a good mechanic that we want there to be more people out there that can take advantage of. And so the Combine, one way to think about it is that it and Dalton, yeah, how could I forget Dalton? Sorry, Kenny. you've been around so long that you missed the bandwagoning happening this year. We want there to be more companies like this, right? More organizations that say, you know, I can develop my resources into real estate development on Urbit. That this is actually, you know, I don't need to think about how I'm going to make revenue right now. We don't quite know what the revenue model looks like on Urbit. But we do know that there is a lot of land that needs developing and a lot of experiences that need to be better and way more people that need to come and use this thing. So the Combine seeks to do this, to take chunks of address space and invest it in entrepreneurs, organizations that are going to build something. And what we look for in this is, you know, primarily people that have some proven track record of being able to build. So, you know, in a way, you can imagine the grants program kind of feeding into this. I imagine there will be many people that come into grants first and spend a lot of time working within grants, develop their skill set, and eventually get a very clear idea of something that they want to build. But building that thing is not a, you know, let me spec it out and then build it and I get paid and I'm done. Very little software, very few creations at all simply get built and then cease to be built continually. It's often a process, and that requires some kind of sustained interest in seeing the thing become better. And so where a grant has to have a specified deliverable, the Combine is more of something that we want you to work on for a long time and to make your time worthwhile. Y'all may know Poldek Tonteg. He's been around for a little while. He's leading the Combine. If you are curious about this, and you know you have an idea, you want to float by us and talk to us about, reach out to him. You can reach out to me too, but he'll probably respond faster. So I'd recommend that. The theme, I think, that the foundation will have is that it is going to continue to seek to coordinate and foster this growing decentralized ecosystem. So we both want to see more entities crop up and then help make sure that they are all supported and kind of rowing in the same direction. I imagine very frequently the foundation will bring people in internally. We'll work with them for a while, and eventually they will develop some idea of their own, and we will spin them off. Right? The foundation should always be a small team. I don't expect it to become a product organization that hires to become a very large team that builds its own products and own tooling. Instead, it will consistently look to shed domains of responsibility to individuals that will own them, or organizations that will own them, and thereby keep its focus, well, kind of meta in that capacity. So that's about all I have. So if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them here. I'm also debating, just going straight into the hangout session. So if you have any questions, ask them now. And if I don't hear anything there real quick, then I'm going to go ahead and toss in a meeting link, and then we can all jump on that, and you can just ask me your questions directly, because that's, I think, more fun. I'll give it like 5 minutes. When's the next IRL meetup for Urbit? It's a good question. It depends on where you mean. I know that in the Bay Area, they do usually an Urbit IRL meetup about once every month or two. I haven't seen any announced, but I'm betting that there will be one soon. If anyone on is, well, if anyone's paying attention, it's a good time to start you're an IRL Urbit meetup again. People like these things. Basically, look, everyone have meetups. We do want to fund meetups and get people getting together in real life. So, reach out to Teller Ravnut if you want to, if you want to host one of these things. Yeah, okay. There's lots of things going on. Yep. Okay. Does this change the trajectory of current and near future grants? I don't think so. Like we want, like, there's a couple things that are going to need to change about the trajectory of current grants, but that's mostly a policy thing. Something else that has been happening recently, as you've probably noticed, is that the value of Urbit address space is quite high, which is a really good problem to have. It's a very difficult thing to manage from a grants perspective, because for the longest time we've awarded milestones in stars, and now stars are worth 22K, and so there are not very many things that it makes sense to compensate for, outright, that much money. We do have a project that, a community-driven project that wraps stars in an ERC20. So it's a 1-to-1 conversion. You may have heard about it. That means that you can actually take a star and you can talk about half of a star. So I do expect that, one of the things we're trying to deal with is how to compensate current grants right now. And with wrapped stars around the corner, our thinking is largely that we need to have a better policy in place that more consistently rewards grants without, throwing money away, without overcompensating. We need to actually steward the foundation's assets for, the duration of 30 years is the timescale we're thinking on. So we have to make sure that we can make a lot of grants. That said, we do still want to reward those that get in early right now, because this is the time in which we can ensure that we have 30 years to continue operating. So, it should be the case, that people that get in now have an outsized benefit because they're going to get enough address space to where, it will moon much more in the future. And like, if you get in now, we want it to be the case that you have a lot of upside. We don't want to be irresponsible with the way that we pay that out. So I expect, so that's compensation. We're working on that, trying to figure out, exactly how to compensate in WrapStar, what the formula is. The other part of grants policy that is changing is just that as I'm trying to boot up this community-driven grants program, I need to find help, people that are going to work with contributors on their projects. And so I'm in the early stages of launching that. And so there's a little bit of lag time because I want to get that going in order to try it on this large influx of grants. Yeah, okay. So will there be more detailed info about the Combine? Best to write an email. Those emails are all going to basically go to two people, me and Anthony, who's in this chat. I see him popping in down there. Poldek Tonteg. Let me throw that up here. Hang on. There, how about that? All right, if you want to know about the Combine, send a DM to this guy. He will get on a call with you. This is our preferred way of doing things. Just talk to people. We'll give you the lowdown, start talking to you, begin a conversation, and take things from there. Let's see, what else we got in here? What kind of projects are preferably funded? It's a good one. So I like random ideas. It's good to see all kinds of stuff. That said, there are certain things that we are really looking for. Mainly these are the things that play most strongly to Urbit's strengths. What Urbit is very good for is building networked applications that, so we have this saying at Tlon, Urbit has no single player mode. That's kind of true, right? Like the key value proposition of Urbit is that it makes it possible to communicate with other individuals in a really natural way, both programmatically and ethically, you might say, right? It's peer-to-peer by default. It's the way that you expect it to be, and that has all kinds of great properties. So the kinds of applications that involve coordination with other human beings and communication with them are a really, really good fit for building on Urbit today. There are things that are less of a good fit for various technical reasons. Like, if you have to deal with large file storage, we don't really have a good solution for that yet. We do have good ideas on how there will eventually be those solutions, but they are not quite here yet. And so you're going to have a much better chance playing to the things that Urbit can do today that are going to be very good. We do think a lot about DAOs. The decentralized organization is, naturally when you have a system that is very good for doing communication with other individuals in this decentralized way, and you meanwhile have this, like booming cultural movement towards DAOs, well, the two kind of go well together. And I say DAO as most generally as I possibly can. I don't necessarily mean any specific form of DAO, but the idea is that, getting groups of people to coordinate online and in such a way that they own their own tools is of paramount importance. And it's something that Urbit is really good for right now. And so these are kind of no-brainers for us. Cool. Yeah, it looks like, Anthony is handling this in the comments, but yeah, basically it's going to be rolling right now. We're taking this in kind of a bottom-up approach. We don't have, a good idea about how much, volume we're going to have to deal with. This is a new thing, so it kind of makes sense for us to feel out the space experimentally with a number of individuals first, and then figure out if something like a batch makes sense as we, gain more notoriety. Let's see. How many projects would it take roughly to create something like a Reddit alternative? I mean, one project really. It's like Reddit on Urbit. We already have a groups primitive that is mostly organized around the groups application. But I could imagine, okay, so let's say two projects. One is to take the groups that underpin the groups application that you'll find from landscape, and take that primitive of grouping people together and make it a little bit more general, so it's a little less tightly coupled to that specific product. That's a fairly tractable problem, I think, and it's something that Tlon will probably focus on early next year. When you have groups that are very easy to extend, well, what is Reddit? Like, it's a kind of forum with threaded comments and an upvoting mechanism. Like, that's pretty much it. So if someone wanted to go and build a forum with threading and an upvoting system, you could use GraphStore the same way that we already do. You already have the back end there, and so you may not even need to write any Hoon. You might need to write a little bit when you want to tie that into GroupStore for the specific, to coordinate these subreddits, these group context, these group specific forum boards. But anyway, that's basically the whole architecture. You have groups as what allows you to create subreddits of some kind. You need invites, which we already have an invite mechanism for that you could extend. And then you need a data model that holds this threaded, upvoted forum type thing. Make a proposal. We'll talk about it. Do I have an idea of the size of initial funding? Yeah, like we think on the order of 100 to 250,000 US dollars, whatever that ends up being in stars. We conceptualize the Combine as like an early stage seed round that will borrow from the YC model to some degree, right? The idea of, let's, the model is basically, let's invest enough to get you up and running and get to the point where you can have something built that's very good and looks, probably, get a good picture of how much you actually need to raise in order to do this thing for a long period of time and demonstrate some results. And then as we work with you and provide, not only financial support, but ecosystem support, because we know all the core developers at Tlon, we know pretty much everybody in the ecosystem, and can make sure that you get whatever help you need to build your thing. We can then connect you more broadly with the rest of the ecosystem that has the same interest we do in investing in you. So I know that we have a lot of Galaxy holders that very much want to see Urbit become much more useful and have many more people on it because they own this big stake in it, right? They also want to do the same thing. They want to invest in your ideas. So that's kind of how we think about the initial funding. All right. Okay, I'm not seeing too many other questions, so I'm going to take this as a good time to switch over to the meet. So if you want to just jump on a call, hang out and talk to me and with everybody else on that call, and ask your questions directly, here is a meet link that you can jump into. So with that, we'll wrap this up. We'll have more news sometimes towards the end of December about what is, what ends up happening after we talk to the Galactic Senate, and get a real clear picture of what the foundation is going to do. So, yeah, I will see you on the meet and talk to you on the network.